Welcome to the K Nation Movement Podcast. This is episode 14. Today we have Mitchell Shiell on the show. For those of you that don't know, Mitchell is the creative director of K Nutri. He's also completing his master's degree, and it's a pleasure to have him on the show. We're going to do a little Q&A with keto and everything that we're up to.
Thank you, Aaron.
You're welcome. Well, thanks for being on the show, Mitch. I'm actually excited to talk more about keto and just get into some of the nitty-gritty stuff. And with you joining K Nutri, coming into it, you really had no idea what keto is about.
Yeah, I think what's more important is me asking you questions about keto, because obviously you know more than I do, right? I have an idea of keto, and for those that don't know, I'm doing my master's in integrative molecular and cellular physiology. But in terms of keto, you're definitely more knowledgeable. So I think it's going to be more me asking you questions about keto and then getting a nice response about it.
Yeah, I'm open to that. Let's, we can start off wherever, and hopefully the audience just learns a little bit more.
Yep.
And they get some value out of this podcast.
Yep. So actually, let me tell you about experience I had, though, because when I first joined the company, I wanted to learn more about keto, and I thought there's no real better way than just doing, right? So instead of studying, I just decided to try keto for a month, and it was really, really difficult. And one of my main criticisms of keto is it's a harder diet to stick to because it takes a lot more discipline than other diets. And one of the main reasons I found was because anytime I walked into a grocery store and I did my own shopping, it's amazing once you start the diet, you realize how much carbs there are out there and how much products are carbohydrate based. And you feel severely limited coming from a Western diet to a keto diet. So my question is, what basic tips do you have when it comes to like entering that grocery store and shopping for keto for the first time? What do you recommend someone to be doing?
Yeah, it's honestly tough. I mean, for anyone who's from North America or is used to a standard Western diet, I mean, everything you really eat is on a foundation of bread or a carbohydrate source. So not only is it throwing your whole perception of what a healthy diet is on its head, but now you're taking everything you've already had in your kitchen, in your pantry, in your freezer, and most of it has got to go in the garbage, right? So going to a grocery store can be a real challenge, and it's one of the reasons why if you go on our Ketovation website and you just enter your email, you'll get a free grocery list and an alternative guide. That's a pretty good place to start in terms of knowing what replacements you can make, what you're currently eating now and what you can kind of substitute it with. But general tips for getting into a grocery store is to avoid the aisles, avoid anything that's in a box. And this suggestion is basically keto and beyond. So keto, paleo, the Mediterranean diet. If you look at anything that takes you back to a more ancestral way of eating that's kind of primitive in nature, removing refined sugar, removing anything that wouldn't have necessarily been found in your ancestors' diet a long time ago, nothing really would have came in a box, right? We never would have been foraging in the forest and come across a box of cereal. It just wouldn't have happened. So typically I would say to avoid the aisles, avoid anything that's in a box. And if you find something that, you're kind of questioning yourself over, just do a quick scan of the nutrition label. I think people feel embarrassed. They don't want to be that person that's standing in nutrition aisles reading off nutrition labels, but it's really good to be aware of that. You'd be surprised how many things have sugar in them that don't need sugar, like salad dressings and sauces. Like there's absolutely no need for them to have sugar in it, but they're laced with sugar, and you never know because they're not necessarily sweet. So be conscious of that. Don't be afraid to read labels. And if it has a long list of ingredients and there's things that you can't pronounce, you're better off just putting it back on the shelf. So for me, it's build your foundation of the 5 to 10 key foods that are going to build the pyramid of your keto diet or whatever diet it may be, which is typically based around meat, seafood, and eggs. And then you can kind of base it around that. So you can fill the rest with, avocados and nuts, shop for olive oil and coconut oil. And really just off the top of my head, those are basically most of the things that your food pyramid will be based on.
Do you ever find that the fact that you're kind of looking at avocados, nuts, meat, seafood, do you ever feel that you're limited in the amount of food that you're eating? Because I feel like when you have carbohydrates as an option, there's just so much good tasting food and so many ways of eating it that you never kind of get tired of it, right? Whereas if you're on a keto diet, do you feel like it could get like bland or redundant, or do you think there's just as many ways we just haven't kind of worked it out yet?
Well, you know what? I think it was a bigger challenge in the past. And I think because of the internet and because of this evolution of keto reemerging into media and Instagram, people have done a really amazing job of bringing recipes to the forefront that really they make you feel like you're not missing out on anything. So for me, I didn't necessarily need those recipes, and I don't now. Like, the best way to put it is that I don't miss bread when I'm on keto, and I don't necessarily miss rice. If I get the right foods in, if I eat enough chicken and red meat, I'm typically very satisfied mentally and physically. And I think that is one of the troubles people run into when they start keto. It takes a certain period of time for everyone to kind of break that sugar addiction cycle. So
I definitely felt that.
Right?
First time I started keto, I mean, like there was chocolates in my cupboard, and I didn't realize how addicted I was to sugar until I stopped eating sugar. Because I never thought like, oh, this is not addiction. I'm just hungry. I need to eat food, right? Yeah. And the second I stopped keto for like 3 days, I just remember like laying on my couch in my living room, and like I could look at the pantry door, and it was this was haunted, like talking to me. Like I needed to go there. I needed to eat candy. Like that's all I wanted. Yeah. But it's funny. Like it takes about like what 5 days, 7 days, and then it kind of, for me at least, 5 days, and it was gone.
Yeah, I mean, for everyone it's different, but it's literally you're breaking an addiction. I don't care what people say. Sugar in its basic form is a drug. The way that your body reacts to it, what happens physiologically in your body when it's ingested in high amounts, especially in forms like high fructose corn syrup. And if you look at what happens when you stop having chocolate or sugar or candy or whatever it might be, like you said, the first few days of keto might be a little bit difficult, and some people feel, they might have headaches or they might feel deprived. And it's also the same when you have chocolate again after being on keto for a while. If you've ever done a low carb diet and you've removed refined carbs and chocolate from your diet, and you've had like a cheat day where you've had way too much chocolate, you feel so incredibly sick, and your body really has no idea what to do with all that. And it's a really scary thing, but it's also just something that we've grown up on, right? I mean, everything for children starting from a young age revolves around chocolate. It revolves around candy, and they're all reward systems, right? Like when a kid, has a good soccer game, you go out, you take them out for ice cream. When a kid is crying, you give them a lollipop. From a really young age, we're conditioned to be rewarded with chocolate and candy.
So we associate chocolate and candy with good times. So exactly. It not only builds a physiological dependency, because is there a physiological dependence on sugar?
I mean, in its basic form, if you look at your glucose levels and your insulin levels, there's certain, negatives that occur with having your blood sugar drop, not, feelings of nausea, headache, and those are basically just the simple forms. Yeah.
But your liver can counteract that, because your liver can create glucose when there is none, right? Because, that definitely is a strong case for the psychological addiction to sugar, because we grow up and it's comfort food. If you're around Christmas time, if you're around Halloween, if you're celebrating a birthday, like a birthday, the first thing you think of next to gifts is the cake that you're eating, right? And a cake is just purely sugar.
It is. And sorry to interrupt, but I just want to finish that thought from the question that you had about, struggling with wanting to eat carbs and you're on keto. And one of the things I noticed is the people that struggle the most, they never give it up entirely. So they try to fill their diet in, especially in the first few weeks, with things that taste like sugar, whether they're, chocolate bars that have sugar alcohols, Coke Zero,
a lot of Coke Zero,
artificial sweetener. There are some low carb breads that I don't have any problem with them, but you start to fill your diet in with things that you've already been having, and you don't commit fully, so you never reap the benefits fully. And so you're always stuck in this limbo of having the sugar cravings because you're always trickle feeding your body things that taste just like sugar. But if you can go without it, I highly recommend it. If you can cut out the low carb alternatives and really, really just stick to the basics, your body will thank you for it, and you'll stop seeing food as a reward and you'll just see it as food, right? Food in its basic form is intended to fuel us and allow us to survive. That's the basic form of food. I don't think food was ever intended to be a part of pleasure.
It's become so cultural though. I mean, like, I come from a family, my mom's a cook, my dad's a good cook. So like food, I mean, I don't know if I fully agree. I don't know if I can 100% agree with you on that one, right? Because you're saying that food is just there to eat, right? And to live and sustain yourself. And yes, to a certain extent it is. But we're human beings that have formed societies. We have cultures. We've moved beyond hunters and gatherers. I mean, we shop in grocery stores where we used to just pick berries off the ground and chase down our food. So to say that food's just there for us to eat and for sustenance, it's difficult because you can't say that. You'd be a robot.
Right. No, it's a good point. And the idea of food just being for survival, I think is something that you need to use as a tool to bring yourself down from your relationship with food. If it's something that you can't control or that you've lost control of, changing your perspective is a really good way to bring you down your sense of reality. Not totally straying away from reality, right? I'm not saying to bring, a large board to a party and then, cut it up yourself and start cooking it, right? It's not about bringing yourself back to that evolutionary primitive self.
Yeah, because then like the diet of choice would be sprinting on a treadmill for 5 hours and then wrestling a pig and eating that.
Exactly. And like, it's about, if you have this relationship with food that's gotten completely out of hand based on, whether it's societal norms, the way that your parents raised you, the way that you turn to food in times of stress, happiness, discomfort, breakups, anxiety, depression, whatever it may be. If you've built a bad relationship with food, keto is a great opportunity to cut out what's controlling your life and take over your diet, which I think expressing that amount of discipline, like anything else, studying and getting a good grade, working hard and getting a raise or a promotion, it builds self-confidence in what you're able to do. And people can feel good about breaking that addiction cycle.
Yeah. So I think there's definitely a strong case in order to break the psychological dependence on food. But yeah, keto definitely, I mean, keto's a diet, but I think keto is definitely a discipline too, right? As much as it is as eating food, to turn away from a society that is very dependent on carbohydrates, markets it heavily and makes it super accessible. Like if I would give it what percentage would you say that grocery store has of carbs versus fat and protein products? If you just had to make an estimate, I know it's a tough estimate, I'm putting you on the spot.
If I had to make a guess off the top of my head, and we're excluding fruits and vegetables, I'd guess at over half. I mean, maybe even up to 60%.
I was thinking, like 70, 75%. Because I mean, the amount of carbohydrate-based products is huge, and it's everywhere. And I think now, yes, people are starting to realize that we shouldn't be treating our bodies like chemistry sets and eating like maltodextrine and having all these crazy artificial flavors and sugars and whatnot, and that maybe moving back towards more natural diets or ones lower at least in refined sugars is the way to go. Speaking of artificial sweeteners though, because that's a whole nother area, what do you know about artificial sweeteners? So like I go to Starbucks now and I no longer put sugar in my coffee. I don't even put stevia or anything like that. But there's a ton of different artificial sugars out there now. And they all are sweet and they all taste good. So especially for me, I guess, if I'm drinking a Diet Coke, is there any benefit or detriment to having a Diet Coke versus a regular Coca-Cola outside of getting rid of the refined sugars?
Yeah, I think that's an argument that a lot of people still have every day is, do you take the dangers of artificial sweetener and aspartame, let's say, in Diet Coke? Do you take that risk over the sugar that's found in regular Coke? And where do you weigh the pros and cons? My opinion is that in moderation, Diet Coke is a better alternative to the pure form of sugar that's found in Coca-Cola. But I don't think that Diet Coke in excess is necessarily a good thing. When you look at aspartame, you look at a lot of artificial sweeteners, they've shown an ability to kill bacteria in the gut. That includes good bacteria. Yeah. And
yeah, a lot of people think that bacteria is just a bad thing, but like we're actually mainly bacteria.
Right.
It's like we have a symbiotic relationship where we rely on that bacteria and our bacteria relies on us. Mm-hmm. So aspartame, when you ingest it, is killing the gut bacteria then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so we know, especially with more research as of recently, it's been a very trending topic, is the gut-brain axis. People are studying that in depth, and there's a lot of links between the health of your bacteria in your gut, yeah, and links to things like depression and anxiety.
Well, I mean, it makes sense because your gut is where all digestion is occurring. So any effect that you're having from your diet is definitely affected by your gut biome. Gut biome being the population of bacteria inside your body. So to say so pretty much, yeah, it would be systemic because anytime you have altered gut biomes, then you have altered metabolism, and then that is getting into your bloodstream because like anytime you eat anything, the energy is ultimately ending up in your bloodstream, and your bloodstream obviously flows through your entire body. So it's not too far-fetched, I guess, to take that gut bacteria and have a lasting effect on the brain. That's an interesting area though, because I don't know anything about that area of research, but it makes sense.
Yeah, it is really interesting, and hopefully we can get someone on the show who's a specialist in that field, and we can kind of open that up in more depth because it is very interesting. And on the topic of artificial sweeteners, yeah, there are things called sugar alcohols, and we'll definitely do a video to go into more detail about this. Sugar but alcohols. Yeah. They mimic sugar, yeah, and they don't have any of the calories. Now, the problem with anything that artificial...
Is that the same as aspartame then?
No, it's a little bit different. Okay. Just in its molecular makeup.
Yeah, because I remember I was having ice cream sandwiches a while back, and I saw it had a lot of sugar alcohols in it. Mm-hmm. And that didn't sound good to me.
No, and there's one in specific called maltitol. Yeah. And if you look at a lot of low carb protein bars, low carb candy bars, if you ever seen those sugar free candies that look way too good to be true, it's because they're extremely sweet. They taste really good, but they have this insane effect on your gut. Not so much in the sense of aspartame or killing your gut bacteria, but more in the sense of they're so artificial that they are not digested very well in the stomach. So anyone who consumes maltitol will tell you it has a detrimental effect on your digestion. You'll feel bloated. You'll feel one of two things, either constipated or you'll have terrible bowel movements, and you really will feel sick.
It's incredible to me that companies can make products like this, and there's so much science and engineering going behind making a good flavored product, and then they'll just slap a bear on it and sell it to kids. Like what's with that? Like they literally are taking. It's like when you have a drug or anything that you put on the market, like it has to go through like clinical trials. It's like a real. It starts in cells, then it goes to mice, and then it goes to phase 1, 2, 3. And it's rigorous, but when it comes to food, stuff that we eat every single day, it's like, oh, okay, this tastes good. Let's give it to them. This works, and then we'll deal with the consequences later.
Yeah, the one thing is there's a lot of money involved, right? I mean, any product that has sugar in it on the market, yeah, is gonna likely sell very well to a very vulnerable demographic, which is children.
Yeah, and not even children, like adults too, because like I'm working on my master's degree. You have your master's degree. We're pretty heavy into sciences, and even for us, it's impossible to keep up with everything. like you probably work pretty hard to keep up with all these different chemicals and these different artificial sweeteners and their effects, because it's not easy to stay up to date with that, especially if you have a full-time job that is not in sciences. Like if you're an accountant or you're a mechanic, you're not looking up maltodextrin, the effects of aspartame on gut biome.
Yeah, you're likely not, unless you've caught onto some email newsletter that you keep up with and you actually read daily, or you've subscribed to some sort of science blog, or you listen to our podcast religiously. And even then, we're just scratching the surface on a lot of these topics. But it's hard to be a specialist in a lot of fields, and it's worrisome that companies, in my opinion, they're taking advantage, because the low carb diet is making headlines again, especially keto. Yeah. It's becoming popular on Instagram, all social media outlets. It's getting a lot of coverage on TV. You'll see guests on Dr. Oz show, and it's really getting a lot of attention, which is good. It's good for the diet because it can help so many people. But then with everything else, there are going to be a certain group of people that take advantage. And so that's where the low carb companies have really come out and taken advantage of consumers that don't know better. And they want to do this keto diet, and they think, well, I can do it because this company made a low carb chocolate bar that I can have. Yeah. And so they think it's okay, and they don't understand what maltitol is. They just read that it's sugar free. Yeah. They don't know what a sugar alcohol is. They just read that it's low in net carbs. And so there's these small cues that they'll pick up on, and then, it's just the effects are seen later on, and they're not so hot.
Yeah, it's crazy. I remember I went to Paris and I saw these these street performers that play this ball and cup game where they like moving around the ball and like you're trying to guess where the cup is, and it's a complete scam, right? And it kind of reminds me of these companies and kind of how they function, right? Because it's almost as if they're like performing a magic trick on the people. But the problem is you're dealing with people's health here, right? And the reasoning behind it, obviously, if you have a massive corporation that's employing tons of people, they're going to do their best to make the bottom line. It's no single individual person clicking an evil button, right? Mm. But speaking of that, though, I heard there's a really juicy conspiracy when it comes to carbohydrates and the food pyramid. Have you heard of this? No, the food pyramid. Remember, you must have heard of this. How like companies like Kellogg's and the big carbohydrate companies involved in cereals lobbied to have carbohydrates being the biggest chain in the food pyramid. Mm-hmm. So do you remember like when we used to grow up and we were all taught the food pyramid, and how like the bottom most important thing and like the most thing in your diet is like carbohydrates, like bread and whatnot, and then it's dairy and then meat products and then fat products at the top? Yeah. I'm probably butchering it, but essentially the emphasis was put on carbs. Apparently, there's a body of evidence out there that the reason why carbs was proportionally so high in the Western diet, how it was taught to us in elementary school, was because companies that sold those products lobbied for, not necessarily just Canada, but the U.S., lobbied for people to kind of carry on the information that we need more carbs in our diet, that carbs are the most important source of energy in our diet. And it's funny when you look at keto, because keto kind of flips the pyramid upside down from what it was before.
It's actually completely upside down. Yeah. And actually the bottom of the pyramid is almost completely removed. Yeah. And I think we may be thinking of the same thing, but there was a Time magazine article that I read that was exposing this truth a few years ago. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but in the 1970s, there was one big company called the American Sugar Association. And so they obviously profited from companies selling sugar in their, products. So cereal companies, chocolate bars, candy bars. Exactly. And so what they did was they paid Harvard scientists to falsify and publish false data, blaming saturated fat and taking the blame off of refined sugar. And so that was a big, big game changer in terms of the future direction of North America and its general diet trends, the public information, the kind of knowledge we're taught in school, the food in cafeterias, the food in grocery stores, the food in restaurants. And this really spiraled out of control, in my opinion. I mean, if you look at obesity and type 2 diabetes rates since the 1970s, it's scary. It's honestly petrifying how many young children are dealing with type 2 diabetes in North America, and it's purely from what they're putting in their bodies.
Yeah, and these are children too. So the problem with type 2 diabetes is it's a chronic disease and it doesn't end well. I mean, the comorbidities involved with diabetes and obesity are massive. If you take the comorbidities of just obesity alone, it would be considered, I think it would be the number one killer in first world nations.
It is 100%. Yeah. Especially leading to heart disease.
Heart disease, high blood pressure, atherosclerosis.
Its contribution to cancer. I mean, obesity is seen in up to 40 to 50% of all cancer cases, period.
Yeah. Not doesn't cause cancer, but makes cancer more aggressive when you get it.
Exactly.
And that's a big deal because you can get cancer throughout your lifetime, and your T cells will combat it. But if you're an obese patient and you end up with cancer, the environment is just. You talked to Dr. Connor about this.
First podcast we had.
Yeah, it was the first one ever. The environment of that tumor is far more favorable for growth. I have to change the cameras soon, so probably a good time to do it now. Yeah, flick them over. So I remember I talked to you a while ago when I started trying to do keto, and one of the things that you said was you just go cold turkey. There's no way, like, because my idea was, well, if I'm addicted to sugars, then I should probably wean myself off. Kind of like, don't just stop eating them, but like eat less and then eat less and then eat less. Do you still believe that cold turkey is the best way to go?
You know what? And my advice would be a little bit different depending on the person, their circumstance. For you, because you're a younger guy who's athletic, you're still playing a lot of sports, I saw that as an easier opportunity for you to go cold turkey, adapt to fat. I was around if you needed any advice or tips. For the average person, it might be wise to wean off carbs. I mean, if that's going to guarantee you success or increases your chances of sticking to the diet, then 100% you should slowly take yourself off carbs. And who knows, you might not even need a ketogenic diet. Right? I'm a big advocate for keto. I think it works extremely well for a large group of people,
but not for everyone.
But maybe not for everyone. Right? It might not be right for you. And through adapting and applying these ketogenic lifestyles, you might find that you've actually been able to increase the amount of healthy fat, meat, and seafood sources in your diet, drastically reduce the amount of refined sugar and refined carbs in your diet, and now you're finding yourself in a place where your dietary carbs only come from natural, unrefined sources. So you're only consuming potato or sweet potato and some rice, and you've gotten yourself to the bare bones of what your body needs to fuel itself.
I think that's what's important at the end of the day. And we should have Michaela Peterson coming on the podcast. At least we're hoping to. One of the things, because I read Jordan Peterson, her father's book, and one of the things that he preaches was to ask yourself, what can I do today that will make my life better, that I'm willing to do? And cutting refined sugars, like if you talk about keto is a big step. Like just getting rid of all carbohydrates is pretty tough. And if you want weight loss and that's what you're going for, by all means, I personally would recommend it. But if you can just get people to just simply cut refined sugars or at least reduce them. If you're not willing to completely stop eating chocolate bars or potato chips, okay. If you're willing to reduce it by 50%, 10%, 25%, that's a win in my book. I don't know how, I'm sure, I don't think anybody can argue with that. Obviously, if you have type 2 diabetes, if you're obese, if this is something that if you need a drastic lifestyle change, then obviously you need to create more drastic goals, in my opinion. But I think if people just stopped or ate less refined sugars, they'll still get benefits. And not only that, is they'll get the benefit because they're willing to do it. If you set an easy goal, you're more likely to achieve it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And that's one of the reasons that we rebranded from our initial company, which is Ketovation, into K Nutri. Because the mission is technically still the same. We're still fighting refined sugar, But we're doing it from all angles, and we're doing it for people who just need a way to work out their obstacles right now. And I've seen, and I've spoken to a lot of people who said after decades of trying diets, fad diets, reducing carbs, they just couldn't stick to it for a long period of time to see results. They always cracked and they always failed. And so for those people, the relationship with food was so severely, so severe in its nature that they couldn't manage to have a conscious and small portion of carbohydrates. It always led to either binge eating or the consumption of ice cream or candy or chocolate or whatever their body, really craved. I think everybody has something that's kind of their weakness. I know people that don't like chocolate. They literally hate chocolate, but they love candy. Yeah. I know people that hate candy, but they love chips. So I think everyone, and a lot of this obviously is through your childhood, you get emotionally attached to a certain type of food. When I was growing up, I loved McDonald's.
I still love McDonald's.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people still love McDonald's. Yeah. And I think for me, it had a lot to do with growing up. We moved here from a different country, so I experienced McDonald's when I was in the first grade, and it was a big deal. It was a big deal to try McDonald's, and it was the thing that I used to do with my dad. My dad used to work 12, 14-hour days, sometimes 16-hour days. A lot of nights I wouldn't see my dad. But I remember, we used to go out and get food and hang out. And for me, it was like the twofold of having this food that honestly revolutionized my life as a 7-year-old. I mean, it tasted so good. A Happy Meal still tastes amazing. I can't deny that. Happy Meal still? I still get Happy Meals. Big guy, little meal.
That's why they're ID or
exactly. So, I mean, that feeling of getting the meal with the box and the toy, I think it was every kid's, dream come true. It was awesome. So I grew up on that, and I remember phoning my dad after school for years being like, hey, are you getting McDonald's tonight? And I didn't realize it till I got older, but I was really hooked on McDonald's. Yeah. And that was it for me. For some people, it might have been Wendy's. For some people, it might be that, Ben and Jerry's ice cream you shared with your grandfather. We build these relationships with food over time, and then they get embedded into our subconscious, and we don't think about them as adults. We don't address these issues, and we don't understand where they came from.
Yeah. And it's also, it's any lifestyle change is pretty stressful. I mean, for me, it might have been easier for me to get rid of carbohydrates, but I could imagine for some people it could be really tough, especially if you have an emotional connection to food. I eat food because I like to eat food. I've never gone to food because I was depressed or anxious, at least not in a conscious way. But I can definitely imagine the case where somebody is overweight and say they go to the doctor or they get diabetes and the doctor tells them that they may need to take drastic measures. And it's an interesting balance. Is what is it worthwhile telling somebody that has never exercised and has never eaten a well-balanced diet in their life to make extremely drastic measures? Or is it better to give them smaller goals or make smaller changes? What's more effective? Because obviously if you can get them to eat vegetables, if you can get them to go, if they want to go on a keto diet or just cut out the refined carbs, stop eating fast food, all of that stuff, making and start exercising, that's huge. That's definitely going to help them. We know the right prescription, we know what they need to do, but what are they willing to do? I think is the big question, right?
And it's a tough one for someone who needs to make a drastic change. And I know this sounds kind of silly to recommend something like keto because it's depriving yourself of all dietary carbohydrates.
It's an extreme change.
It's an extreme change, but I think if you're willing to change, it's the better option. It's assuming that you're willing to change. I think it's a better option for those in extreme circumstances to use keto versus another diet. And I'll tell you why. Essentially, there's two reasons. One is that you're not being deprived of things that satiate the brain and the body. So fatty meats, we know the effects that it has on the pleasure centers of the brain. we know the effects that it has on the brain in terms of the time it takes to break down. Sorry, in the stomach, the time that it takes to break down.
You're full for longer.
Right, you're full for longer and you're satisfied for longer, right? We talked a little bit about this last week, but the feeling of having a 10 or 12 ounce steak is extremely rewarding. It's assuming you like steak or you eat meat, but it's just one example. For me, the reason I succeeded with keto at a time where I was studying a lot, I couldn't necessarily exercise or spend the most amount of time preparing my meals perfectly. Keto was that perfect alternative because I had fast food options everywhere. If I wanted to go somewhere and get an alternative, I could. If I wanted to get a burger, I just asked for no bun. If I wanted to get a burrito bowl, I asked for no rice. Lettuce burgers. I mean, there were so many options for me, and that's really why I was able to stick to it and why I developed a passion for it, because it was at a time where I struggled to eat clean with carbohydrates. I just felt that with the amount of studying I was doing, the minimum physical activity I was doing, and the stress that I was going through with school, it just didn't feel possible at all. And it was the first time in my life that I felt really frustrated with dieting. And, within weeks of turning to keto, I had turned all of that around. It was really like this groundbreaking moment. And again, it might not be for everyone, but having gone through that struggle of not finding something that's working and feeling extremely frustrated with not seeing results, it worked.
So the thing is, you'd be almost naive to think that that everybody will be willing to stick to keto and will stick to keto if they start, because it's very tough to stick to keto, especially in the beginning, because you have these sugar cravings, right? And then I look at the counter argument being, okay, maybe what we can do then is just cut out refined sugars and we can go towards a keto diet, but we still have some carbs within the diet, right? But my thought is, and this is from experience, is sometimes doing the keto diet, say with 100 grams of carbs, like Mark Bell talked about, dabbling in carbohydrates can almost be more dangerous than just going strictly keto, because now all of a sudden, when you're on strict keto, no carbohydrates and whatnot, once you get through that sugar addiction, all of a sudden you're not really bothered by the box of cereal. You're not bothered by chocolate bars. You're not feeling any sort of craving for it, right? Whether it's psychological or physiological. But when you start adding in like 100 grams of rice, for instance, which for me, so under my experience, I went on the keto diet. I play a lot of sports. I'm very active. And what I was finding was, especially with, I generally have a faster metabolism, that for my athletic performance, like getting carbohydrates in gave me the extra energy that I needed to get through like those workouts or that game, right? But also adding in those extra carbohydrates just made me want to eat more carbohydrates, right? Yeah. So like it's tough, isn't it? Because if you want to give people the best diet advice, but like sometimes like there's pros and cons for everything. Sometimes it's better to go with absolutely no carbs so you avoid all cravings and relapses, or sometimes it's best, especially if you're an athlete, to go with carbohydrates because you want to have an added energy source in your diet, because carbs are still a good energy source. It's just which carbs you're taking in and are you using them, right?
And you know what, we're actually in the middle, if you remember, we're in the middle of editing this video for YouTube, and it's one of our longer ones. And if you guys aren't subscribed, I highly recommend heading to the K Nutri on YouTube, because this video is probably one of the best ones we've made. But it's basically on why keto works, and it goes into a lot of detail about the cycle people fall into with weight loss, especially those that fail with their journey.
Oh yeah.
And so, at least for me and a lot of people that I've spoken to, it's been a really, really common issue where people will commit to the weight loss journey. They'll eat clean. Maybe they don't eat keto, but they'll eat clean. They'll exercise through the week, or they don't, but they stick to their diet. And then by the time Friday rolls around, it's tough because you've spent days being consistent with your meal prepping. You're probably getting a little bit lazier towards the weekend. And most people, not all, they will go out for drinks, maybe with their friends or family, or they'll have a get together or dinner. There's something on a Friday night to celebrate the end of the week, right? And so they'll have a couple of drinks. With those drinks, and anyone who's had a couple of drinks knows that no matter what diet you're on or how disciplined you are, the second you start drinking, if you see a platter of nachos, if you see French fries or if you see anything that is deep fried and breaded, you're going nuts. Yeah. And so I've had this happen to me a lot when I was eating clean and incorporating carbs into my diet. But I'd be at the bar and I'd be, a beer or two in, and I'd be like, we got to get a platter of nachos right now. And let's get an extra large order of fries. Like,
there's a reason why like the burger shops and everything on King and Queen Street or anywhere there's like nightlife stay open till like 5 a.m.
Right. And so, I mean, once you start having that food, you wash it down with more beer or whatever your drink of choice is.
Or you're just really craving like that soda. Yeah. Like I need a soda right now.
Right. And so that night usually ends poorly. And then the next morning you're probably hungover. Yeah. And because you have carbs in your diet and you allow yourself to do that and you're not on keto,
right back on the craving again.
Right. So the next day you're hungover. And so there's a good chance that you're going to go somewhere for lunch or breakfast, and you're going to have a whole lot of food that you shouldn't have, but it's almost like justified. Like, oh, I had a really good week. I was really consistent in the gym. I saw results. I watched what I ate, and I'm hungover. Like, I deserve this. It's the weekend. And so a lot of times we play tricks on ourselves. It's never that feeling of, for me at least, it was never like a guilt eating. It was like, oh, like this is what happened, and now I need to eat more junk food to fix myself.
It's funny how small bad habits, like just doing one thing bad, even if it's like, it's kind of like the butterfly effect or chaos theory, where like a butterfly flaps his wings in New York and there's a hurricane in England. Like you do one tiny little thing and it just, something a little bit worse happens after that, and then something a little bit worse than that happens. And next thing you know, you're just like, you're sitting in a buffet and you're at the Mandarin and you're taking down chow mein and eating waffles and doing all this, right? Because you just decided to take, oh, maybe, you know what, I'm just gonna have I'm gonna have a nice drink tonight. I'm gonna have a gin. You know what, maybe I'm just gonna have like a small thing of fries just to reward myself. That was pretty good. I'm gonna go for a burger. I'm starving. You know what? I've pretty much already given up at this point. I'm eating carbs again. Let's just go for ice cream. Let's eat this. Let's eat that. Let's reward myself. If I'm going to do it, let's do it big. The next thing you know, you're just blowing your diet, right? And it's like that small little catalyst leads to that big, massive change. That being said, small negative things leading to bigger negative things happens, and it's very easy to go down that path. But it's the same way. You can do small positive things to lead to larger positive things. And that goes back to saying, what are you willing to do, right? If you're willing to just cut a small amount of carbohydrates out, it's a small positive change. But because you did that, and say maybe you're like, hey, I did that. Like, I'm proud of myself. That was good. Like, I'm healthier because of it. Maybe I want to go for a 5-minute walk. And you do a 5-minute walk. You're like, you know what? I feel great. That was good. Let's do 10 minutes. Let's cut this out. Let's do this better. And next thing you know, you're on the opposite. So I think, it's important to be able to recognize that the line between going down that like positive behavioral changes versus negative behavioral changes, it's very easy to kind of like avalanche out, but it works in both ways.
It does work in both ways. And I think we are all or nothing creatures as humans. Yeah. And we all have this with some sort of habit in our life. For me, it's with my room. I don't know why. And sometimes I do, and I'm embarrassed to admit it, but I'll look at my room one day and go, wait, how did I get here? I remembered it being clean, and now it's a total disaster. But it's those little things that funnel into the next thing. And so, but it all starts with that one small negative thing. So for me, you drop a pair of socks on your floor. Yeah. And you're like, well, I'll get to that later, right? Yeah. And that was the first step. Yeah. And, like anything else, if you have something you're not supposed to have, it should always be countered with another small positive thing. Because at that stage, it just takes something small and positive to get back from that, right? Like if you have a bad meal, it takes one small workout to get back. Yeah. And if you drop a pair of socks on your floor, it takes 3 seconds to pick it up and put it back in your drawer. But if you let it spiral out of control, it's way harder to address that issue down the road. And typically it spirals out of control without you even noticing or addressing it.
You know, I'm glad you hit on that because I think that like the house or the home is the perfect microcosm of life in terms of like tumbleweeding out of control.
Very scientific.
Yeah, well, it's a really good analogy because like you said, like you can just drop your sock on the floor and then next thing you know, you come home the next day and you're like, I'm just tired. Like I'm just gonna throw my shirt on the floor and hop into bed. And then you wake up and you leave and your bed's unkept and you come back and say, you know what, it's already trashed. Or you say, oh, I'm in a rush. I need to find this shirt. And now you're trashing your room, right? Because you don't care anymore. But it's the same way. So like I come home to a messy room I have a problem. I go off topic a lot, but I'll come back and I'll be like, okay, you know what? Like this is bad. Like this is messy. Okay, I need to make a change. Okay, and you decide. A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll be like, I'm gonna clean my room in one day. I'm gonna do it all now, and that's setting yourself up for failure almost, right? Most of the time, when you give yourself goals that ambitious, you're more likely not to follow through on them. Whereas if I come in my room and I say, I'm gonna fold 3 articles of clothing and then I'm going to relax. Okay? And then when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to make my bed. Okay? And when I come home at night, I'm going to do 3 more articles of clothing. And then over time, you just kind of slowly add to this. And because you're making the conscious effort of cleaning your room, you're not going to be messing it up again, right? Like, why would I just fold 3 things of clothing and then just throw more clothing on the floor? That doesn't make sense, right? So one thing I personally try to do is every morning that I wake up, regardless of how clean or messy my room is, I just make sure that I make my bed. Even if I'm in a rush, I make sure I make my bed. And making my bed is important to me because to me, it means that I'm starting my day by doing something right. I'm making some small positive change. Whether or not my room is clean doesn't necessarily matter, as long as I'm making this small effort to kind of create order out of this chaotic room. I'm starting my day on a good note, and I'm just hoping that because I made my bed, I'm happy I made my bed. I'm proud of myself, and it's very important to be proud of yourself for doing even the small things. I'm going to approach every other task that I do with the same sort of invigoration or the same sort of attitude. So I get on the bus and I think, you know what, I'm going to be sitting here for about an hour. I might as well sit and write in my agenda and plan out what I'm going to do. Okay, I'm proud I did that. I'm organized. I'm ready to go. I get to the lab. I'm not going to sit around and procrastinate now because I made this plan. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do my work. And so now something as simple as just making my bed in the morning, which sounds innocuous, all of a sudden I've had a plan for my day and I'm following it through. And then if you take those small victories and you add them up over the span of months or years, next thing you know, you've reached your goals. And it's the same thing we talked about with Zach Bitter, who runs the ultra marathon, right? Was the one piece of advice Zach Bitter made is don't go out to run an ultra marathon on your first day. Set up a small goal. And whether that be the Mark Bell 10-minute walk or it just be running a 5K time, it doesn't necessarily matter. But as long as you set up a small goal and you make it attainable, then you're on the right path. And then like Rolando said too, as long as you stay focused and you be consistent on those goals, it will all add up in the end and you're going to achieve what you want to achieve.
Yeah, those small goals I think are so critical. I mean, even writing them down so you have them set in stone and you know exactly what you want, right? So for anyone that maybe is thinking about keto or thinking about starting any journey, weight loss or whatever it may be, it all starts with that small goal. So
like maybe like just stop eating chocolate.
Stop eating chocolate and go through your pantry. You know, the places where people fail are typically in preparation and in hunger. And I know from talking to basically anyone who's struggled is when you come home and you're hungry, especially after work, the first thing you do is you open your cupboards. Right? Even if you're not hungry, you open your cupboards.
Yeah, it's a weird reaction. I just open my fridge and like stare at it. I'm like, I'm looking for my keys right now. They're not in here.
Arguments I've had with my dad for leaving the fridge open and just looking inside. While I look inside, yeah. Okay. And I'll just look inside for a long period of time, and I don't even know what I'm looking for, and I know exactly what's in the fridge. And so I think it's a pretty big habit of just snacking on things, especially when you're hungry. And so maybe that could be one goal. Get rid of anything that's accessible that could ruin, my goal at this moment.
Yeah. Just tiny little things. And that way, when failure occurs, it's on a smaller level. And when positivity occurs, it's on a greater level. And because they're easier goals to achieve, you're more likely to hit them and kind of perpetuate that cycle.
Mm-hmm. And so obviously drinking and having bad food is a problem for anyone. I mean, it's a pretty common problem, and it doesn't disappear with keto, right?
You eat more than 3 times a day, so there's a lot of opportunity to make mistakes, right?
Yeah. And say you're on a keto diet and you're out with a group of friends on a Friday night. Same scenario, right?
Brutal.
Right? You're having vodka sodas and everyone's having beers and there's still nachos on the table. You're likely equally tempted to eat that. And one recommendation that I have, and I think has worked well for me and a lot of other people, is to have a big satiating meal before you go out to drink. So don't leave yourself vulnerable. And this comes back to being prepared. Same thing for going to work, same thing for going away for a trip. You need to be prepared. At the end of the day, you have to hold yourself accountable. So if you're going to go out at 9 o'clock, at 8:30, you should have a massive meal, whatever it may be, whether you're fasting in the morning to hoard your macros for the evening, or you're just having a big meal. You need to go out and feel full and satisfied so that when you see food, junk food, or anything that you shouldn't be having, you're just decreasing the risk and decreasing the chances of you indulging with an intoxicated mind that might take control of your body.
Yeah, that's the tough thing too, because if you're intoxicated, it's a whole nother story, because you're not necessarily fully in control of your decisions, right? Like money isn't a thing when you're drunk. Or at least when I'm drunk, I'll walk around with my credit card and I'm using it like a coupon. Yeah. It's a free money coupon. Yeah. But yeah, and I think it's also important to recognize that if you do fail and you do make that mistake, be ready to forgive yourself. Acknowledge it as a mistake. Don't play games with yourself. But I think it's important, like, not to be too hard on yourself, and just go back to the beginning and just take small steps in order to get back to where you were before, and then keep on going.
Right. It's like if you're learning a new sport and you fall down and hurt yourself, it's not because you were bad at it or that you're innately susceptible to failure. It's because you were trying and you were trying to get better. Same thing with starting a weight loss journey, or if you want to put on size or you want to get stronger. There's a good chance that somewhere along the road you're going to hit a hiccup or you're going to feel like you failed.
Good chance you will.
Yeah, you will, right? Almost if you're really trying to get to those goals actively, you will fail at some point. And so if you have a night where you eat really poorly and you feel like I don't have any willpower and this is never going to work for me and I'm going to be overweight my whole life. Well, no, it's not true. It's just because you're actively trying to accomplish something. Yeah. And that for you is that ankle sprain or that, that broken bone. And you just got to go back to the basics, reset yourself, and just try again. You'll come back a lot stronger mentally and physically from it. Yeah.
All right. I think we're near the end of our time slot here. So we have about 3 minutes left of recording. Anything you want to say to our audience?
Yeah. I mean, if you're starting something new, this podcast and, the company was initially based on the ketogenic diet, but it applies to anything you're doing in life. And that's why our motto has always stayed the same: stay focused and be consistent. There's going to be a lot of failure along the way. There's going to be a lot of times where you doubt yourself. But at the end of the day, just stick to it. Get back up if you fall. And really believe in yourself. Find things that work for you, that make you happy, that make you feel fulfilled, and you will guarantee that you will be successful.
Perfect. I guess I should get, the usual format is that we both give advice, or how are we doing that?
Yeah, I'd love to hear your advice too, Mitch.
What are you laughing at me for? I think the one thing to take away then, I like the acronym SMART. So when you're creating goals, you want to make SMART goals. And SMART goals are specific. SMART goals are measurable, they're attainable, they're realistic, and they're time sensitive. Time sensitive is important because if you don't give yourself a time or any sort of framework for your goals, then they're never going to happen. So one more time, specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time sensitive goals. And stress the little stuff, but try to work on small positive changes that will lead to bigger and bigger ones as they accumulate over time.
That's great. I love it.
Perfect. All right. Have a good one, guys.
Thanks for being on the show, Mitch.
Thank you.